Hi everyone and welcome to the Newsagent podcast. I'm Susie Lysaght, Content Manager at Goodlord, and today's episode is a recording of our webinar with Ricky Purdy, Director of Residential Lettings at Dawsons, and Kevin Davidson-Hall, who's a consultant at the Property Franchise Group. So Goodlord's Trilly Martin spoke with them both to get an understanding of just what English letting agents can learn from the changes to tenancy law that Scotland and Wales have already gone through. So without any further ado, on with the podcast.
Hello everyone and welcome to today's webinar on compliance and legislation. Thank you so much for joining us today. I am one of the Senior Customer Success Managers here at Goodlord, and it is my pleasure to be hosting this webinar today with Ricky and Kevin. Ricky has over 20 years of experience within the property industry and will tell us a little bit about the state of play in Wales. Please say hello, Ricky, if you're there.
I am here. Hello. Very nice to be here. Thanks for having me along, Trilly, and looking forward to the session.
Thanks, Ricky. And then we have Kevin, who has over 30 years of industry experience and will be giving us his knowledge and insights on lettings in Scotland. Please say hello, Kevin.
Morning, Trilly. Thanks very much for welcoming me. It's very kind of you, and hopefully together with Ricky we can be of some help to the attendees this morning.
Thanks, Kevin. I'm really looking forward to today. So moving on, for those of you who aren't familiar, Goodlord is an award-winning lettings platform that works alongside your property management system to manage the entire tenancy process. Our customers do trust us to help them stay compliant, generate additional revenue, and some of our services give them time back in their day by streamlining their processes and much, much more. We've been growing and evolving since about 2015, and we have a lot of great resources, podcasts, blogs, the whole thing on our website and also on Spotify. So check them out if you haven't already done so. Our new State of the Lettings Industry report has also launched this week, so please do download this via our website. It is a comprehensive report which surveyed over 2,000 industry professionals for their views on the industry. So moving on to our agenda. Our schedule today includes industry insights, an intro into Scottish and Welsh tenancy law, landlord accountability, periodic tenancies, the abolishment of Section 21, student lets and rent controls, preparing for change, and a question and answer session as well. But we're going to kick off now with some stats. So, Ricky, I'm going to start with you. Would you mind telling us your thoughts on these graphs, and might you have any change in tactics?
Yeah, of course. I'm starting, to the left there with the available properties that we see for rent this year. I think the statistics you've got there mirror what we're seeing on maybe in a regional and a national level there. Really, it is remaining very, very difficult. The sort of supply and demand is a tough one for us as agency, for us as an industry, and for those prospective tenants. So the number of available properties has continued to remain low. There are sort of slight fluctuations as the years progressed, pinch points, busy periods, and less busy periods, which would be seasonal possibly. But ultimately, yes, the available properties are an awful lot lower than they were. An increase shown in Wales there at 7%, or significant increase, is a small proportion, and that's going to be pocketed, maybe North and South Wales. With a small increase or no change probably being the sort of the more accurate reflection. From our perspective, we've seen almost identical number of properties this year as we did last year in terms of market appraisals and valuation opportunities. Our conversion rate is higher. We know we've managed to sort of successfully sort of get more properties to market than we did last year to date. But that is almost negated by the amount of properties that are leaving, landlords that are considering leaving or have exited, or the number of properties that are staying with longer tenants. So the terms are extending on the back of our legislation changes last year, as well as the current climate where there is no properties for a prospective tenant to move to if they've outgrown or fancy a change. So it is very much aligned with those stats. I think they're very accurate from a Welsh perspective as you've recorded them.
Thanks, Ricky. And same question to you, Kevin, please. What are your thoughts on these figures? And are you suggesting any change in processes?
I've yet to meet a letting agent who says they've got enough stock. So the stats don't really surprise me. It's interesting. I think the most fundamental thing I'll say about any of these charts, not just specifically this one, but what it comes down to is it's actually somebody else's story. And the question that I put to all of the people listening to this this morning is, does someone else's story need to be your story? And I would say not. I think we got some data not so long ago from the Edinburgh solicitors. It was mainly talking about East Fife or Fife and the Central Belt. And if I believed that, I would be down 25% this year on my letting stock. The actual reality is I'm up 50%. So I know that we are doing something different from most letting agents in Scotland. And that's your challenge. Do you want to be a market taker, or do you want to be a market maker? For sure, there's some challenges. I mean, landlords are getting older, where you've got a very strong sales market, particularly over a period of years. There's a temptation, to take the profit and run. But most people are staying in. Yields are good. And as long as that remains the case, in Scotland, we can get you, 10% yield and better than 10% capital growth, despite all the help that the government is giving the property sector and the private landlords. I think most people are staying in.
Yeah.
Perfect. Thanks, Kevin. Okay, so we have some more statistics here, everyone. Kevin, back to you, if you don't mind. Very much keen to hear your expectations around landlords using agents over the next year, or possibly leaving the market.
I think you've got a huge opportunity here, and my English colleagues are already saying that one of the key differentiators around this rentals reform bill is that most agents are nowhere near as well informed as they should be. And in fact, most of them are really not informed at all. So we're already seeing a drift towards the brands that I work with, from landlords switching agent or from self-managing landlords coming in for the first time. And I think that will continue. So such as the Renters Reform Bill is actually a big opportunity if the agents inform themselves, which is what we're trying to help you with today. You've got to really know your stuff. You've got to be able to sell it, and you've got to rehearse these conversations, and you've got to be able to talk to landlords with complete confidence and authority. If you can do those things, you'll win more business, and you'll take the bread out of your competitors' mouths.
Absolutely. That happens to be lots of the things I'm having conversations about with my customers too. Ricky, what are your thoughts here on the landlord stance in Wales?
Very similar to what Kevin has said, and I think there's sort of a general consensus probably. We're getting used to the changes, the legislation that came into play last year, and we're taking advantage of the benefits that come with that and the positivities to sort of outweigh the pessimism and the sort of the skepticism that there is around the market at the moment from a landlord's perspective. So great opportunities there. I think the changes in terms of notice period and length of tenancies and commitment periods from a landlord now versus pre-legislation in December has helped the cause. So as Kevin said, there are the opportunities there, having great conversation, communicating with the landlords that we manage, even the landlords that self-manage, landlords that we secure tenants for that self-manage, but ultimately those landlords that secure tenants through other agents or have properties managed by other agents. Landlords leaving and entering the market, yes, there are going to be landlords that exit, taking advantage of some capital growth, as Kevin has said, but ultimately the conversations, the communication, and being that the fountain of knowledge, almost being that sort of go-to person or brand to reassure those landlords that are on the fence that possibly a knee-jerk reaction is going to be the wrong one. And once they're understanding the benefits of it, hopefully they will maintain landlords or maintain being a landlord, or ultimately in the interest of us as an agency, choose us as an agent to manage instead of it themselves and take that burden away. So yeah, we are seeing opportunities there. We've seen less landlords leave the market than we'd assumed or forecast at the start of the year. And I don't see that changing at the end of this year. Trilly, I don't think, we're looking at our forecast for Q1 and Q2 next year, and that's not going to change. The commitment period for landlords now are 12 months, or 12 monthly in relative terms, through legislation that we'll touch on later. So we have already got the commitment from landlords until this time next year or further afield, which we can then use that time to reassure further and educate that, that's continually the best thing to do. So in summary, less leaving than we assumed. Yes, some are leaving and that's having an impact on supply, but ultimately, I think, it's a positive.
And
Absolutely.
Always remember as well that landlords leaving is only one side of the coin. There's also landlords coming in. I've seen some data that suggests across the UK as a whole, there's actually more landlords entering the sector than are leaving. I take that with a slight pinch of salt, but it came from a reasonably authoritative source. I'm quite sure the landlords, or some of the landlords coming in, are different from some of the landlords that are exiting, in as much as they might be more sophisticated, they might have bigger holdings, they might be incorporated, those sort of things. And there are some challenges for an agent in dealing with, more sophisticated, incorporated, bigger clients than dealing with a one-off, landlord with a single unit who might be of advancing age and is possibly looking at sort of cashing in to retire. So again, it comes down to agents raising their game, coming at it in a different way.
I think, yes, just to sort of quickly sort of touch on that point there, ultimately, I completely agree there, Kevin. Statistically, where we've secured more new business, more new landlords year to date than we did last year. And that is negated within part by those landlords that are leaving and therefore taking properties with them. The majority of the properties or the landlords that we're interacting with now that we hadn't previously are a mixture, but predominantly they are landlords that we're self-managing that have now decided to use an agent for all of the benefits that we'll talk about later. And those landlords that are looking to go to maybe a better quality of agent, or an agent that is able to support them better or more than they have been at the past. So changes of agency is key. Landlords expanding portfolios is a key factor for us as well, as those landlords that self-manage and that need a little bit of support. So yes, we are seeing more, and that's been eaten into a little by those landlords leaving, but it's not a pro rata number at the moment.
Well, I'm growing my portfolios all over Scotland, so it's definitely a net gain here. And again, it comes down to, do you want someone else's story or do you want to write your own story?
I feel like knowledge is power right now. If you're an agent, the more you know about all these changes, the better you're going to be able to support any new landlords coming into the market, or try and do what you can to save some landlords who are thinking of exiting the market.
Right.
So I'm going to give you a bit of a brief background now about tenancy law. So we'll start with Wales for our listeners. So the Renting Homes Wales Act 2016 aims to simplify the Welsh rental process and make being a tenant in Wales more straightforward. So what does this involve? In short, there's three main things. So number one would be tenancy changes. Assured short-hold tenancies will be replaced with two types of occupation contract, either a secure contract for community or social housing landlords, or a standard contract for private landlords. The second main change was evictions and notice period changed. So Section 21 possession notices will be replaced with Section 173 notices under the new Act. This extends the minimum notice period that landlords can give tenants on a periodic contract to 6 months for a no-fault eviction. Landlords and agents won't be able to serve a Section 173 notice during a fixed-term standard contract, and can only serve one for a periodic standard contract after 6 months. The third main change, new safety rules. So new rules under the new Renting for Homes Fitness for Human Habitation Wales Regulations 2022. These highlight that landlords should ensure gas safety certificates, smoke alarms, and electrical certificates. Moving on to give you a brief background of Scotland. So the new legal requirements for landlords and tenants are detailed in the Private Housing Tenancies Scotland Act 2016. The new tenancy, which must be used for all new tenancies created on or after the 1st of December 2017, is open-ended, which means a landlord will no longer be able to ask a tenant to leave simply because the fixed term has ended. It provides a more predictable rents and protection for tenants against excessive rent increases. It also includes the ability to introduce local rent caps for rent pressure areas and provides comprehensive and robust grounds for repossession that will allow landlords to regain possession in 18 specified circumstances. The Cost of Living Tenant Protection Scotland Bill 2022 includes a rent freeze and suspension of activity on evictions. From April the 1st this year, rent increases have been capped at 3%, although private landlords can apply to increase rents up to 6% to help cover certain costs. Enforcement of evictions will also continue to be prevented with certain exemptions. Finally, the current rent cap only applies to the private rented sector, and interestingly, combined with rent price data, Property Mark says that landlords in Scotland are increasing rents between tenancies to cover their costs and anticipated costs due to fear of ongoing rent control legislation. So hopefully that gives some insight to our listeners today. And we're going to move on. So, Ricky, would you mind telling us a little bit about landlords and how Welsh legislation affects their role? I'm hoping we can have the next slide here.
Of course. I think we've got probably the two aspects of it at the moment. Trilly, we've got the Rented Homes Wales Act that you've noted the key point of there, which has been effective since December of last year. That is, as well as Rent Smart Wales, which is the legal requirement for licensing and registration that landlords and agents have in Wales and have had for some 5 or 6 years. So they work hand in hand effectively with the registration and licensing requirements for agents and landlords, running parallel with the changes that you mentioned earlier in the Renting Homes Wales Act from December. So there were two things to get used to in Wales, and we are still getting used to both of them. Whilst we're 5 years down the line in terms of Rent Smart Wales, that 5-year license and registration renewal was for the majority last year. At the same time as the Renting Homes Wales Act, which came into play, that should have been in play in July and got deferred to December the 1st of last year, which clouded the waters a little, but gave the much needed extra time for everybody to align their needs on it. So what is currently in place and how that affects the landlords and the tenants, very much as you've said, I think it was getting used to fundamental changes in anything that we've done as agency, anything that landlords have done as private landlords or landlords using an agency, and understanding the knock-on effects and ultimately the benefits or disadvantages of them. The registration and licensing, as I've said, with Rent Smart Wales is 5 yearly. That is, an important factor last year and this year as to how and when landlords choose to stay within the industry, to carry on and not look to exit, as one more thing for them to do possibly. The benefits from notice periods, not having a Section 21, not having an assured short-out tenancy and replacing that with an occupation contract definitely has its advantages, but initially was seen as a disadvantage. A long commitment of time, ultimately 12 months as a minimum for landlords, with a 6-month fixed term and a 6-month notice period that would follow thereafter, as opposed to in line with. So once we were able to communicate and educate and sort of, reassure our clients and landlords in general, maybe not clients of ours, that maybe will be one day, I think the thought process were aligned that, getting our our ducks lined up, getting everything organised in conjunction with the fitness for human habitation and the safety elements that you noted earlier, were all important, but advantageous at the same time.
Absolutely. And same questions to you, Kevin, please. Do your landlords have a lot of similarities or not so much?
Well, Scotland had a huge bomb dropped on the private letting sector that started in December 2017. It was a complete root and branch reform. So everything changed. We now have as our main tenancy type private residential tenancies, PRTs. With that came letting agent registration. There was landlord registration prior to this already, and also the letting agent code of practice. So all of these things, and actually a specialist housing chamber. So there's what we call the first tier tribunal now, which deals with all these housing cases. So there's no more county court or in Scotland sheriff's court. It's all done in the first tier tribunal. I mean, there's advantages and there's disadvantages. We had in Scotland all the concerns and all the worries that your listeners will have in England. I mean, I can do it in a Scottish accent if you like, but the end of the world is nigh. It'll never work. It'll never grow. But do you know what? It did. I mean, it actually worked fine. I mean, my job was actually the preparation of our businesses for all of these changes, which was a massive task. We had to get them all qualified in order that they could meet the standard for the letting agent registration. There are a few bottlenecks around that, like getting people to do their studying, then getting them through exams, finally getting all the paperwork done. Even stuff like CPD hours, there were people scratching around at the last minute because they couldn't evidence enough CPD hours. So, if your listeners can see all those things coming and start preparing well in advance, because there's a clear sort of direction of travel here. And I mean, the dust hasn't settled yet on exactly what England's going to do. But my feeling is that by the time it does, it's going to be much closer to the Scottish model than things look at the moment. I'd be very surprised if we don't end up with some sort of landlord registration. This portal thing, I mean, it sounds great, but do you know what? It'd be much better if they just registered landlords, really. So that's my feeling. The upsides of it are, well, there's a couple of downsides, and we'll maybe get to talking about those later. I mean, the PRT effectively took out tenant fees in Scotland. So obviously that had to be addressed and charges restructured to fill that gap. And also there are no more renewal fees. So these, tenant fees have gone in England, but loss of renewal fee income is going to be a significant factor. So that's going to require some thinking about, and it's going to require some restructuring. The advantage is that people stay longer, and there's been a drift towards longer occupancy in Scotland, and I think that certainly continued during the currency of the PRT. I can see tenancy lengths extending further. And if you think about that, and maybe you need just a slightly different mindset, but the primary interest of most landlords is actually full occupancy, no voids. So having a longer-term tenant who stays with a right to review the rent every 12 months, which is what they have on the PRT, is actually pretty good. And as long as the agent's charging structure is right at the beginning, and you're charging a decent commission rate, you'll be fine. In fact, you'll be better off. We grew our income in Scotland the year the PRT came in.
Yeah, I just to echo those thoughts. Oh, sorry, Trin. Just to sort of reiterate those points, which are applicable here in Wales as well. I think it ultimately the aim was to improve the sector, to improve the quality of tenant landlord agent interaction, the quality of properties, and we are getting that way. Properties did leave the market, landlords did leave the market on the back of the registration and the licensing and the sort of requirements around fit and proper person requirements, qualifications, set standards for landlords to self-manage, and of course qualifications, for agents within agencies. So having the knowledge bank of individuals within a company, in a company, or landlords that manage privately has definitely increased and improved. And there is opportunities there, which, we've been able to sort of benefit from and take advantage of, and look to train ourselves individually with a sister company, likewise agents across Wales and private landlords. So having requirements in place within 12 weeks of starting in agency as a new member of staff or a new member of a team within an agent in Wales is commonplace now and a requirement, and it's definitely improving sort of, like I say, people's capabilities and their confidence, which is, reflected in the clients that they're dealing with. So those are positives for sure.
And it's all loosely folded, I'm sure, Ricky, just in Wales as it is in Scotland. Letting agent code of practice, even the PRT, certainly all the requirements around safety. It's a loosely folder, and the government are slipping new pages into that folder on a regular basis. So the challenge, or the greater challenge for agents in England, will be how do they prepare for all that to start with? But B, once the regime is in, how do they then keep themselves up to date and fully informed as time passes? And that's in Scottish terms, it's like painting the fourth bridge. It's a never-ending task.
Yeah. Ultimately, that's exactly the same in terms of the sort of the middle point there. What's the impact been? It's, as we've touched on, far more positives than there have been negatives. Preparation is key. The administration, transition, communication and the requirements being staged and staggered here by default rather than intentionally definitely helped us prepare for what was a wholesale changes, as Kevin touched on earlier. So the impact has been very large and is ongoing and will continue to be ongoing with additions and changes that will come about, no doubt.
Perfect. I think that covers some really useful suggestions for some of our English agents listening as how to prepare for similar changes. So next we are moving on to periodic tenancies and the removal of Section 21s. So, Kevin, would you tell our audience today what the current setup is in Scotland for this and how this has impacted the industry?
Right. Well, PRT is perpetual. There is no fixed term. You can't have minimum term. You can't take away the rights of the tenant to give the minimum notice period, which is basically 28 days. So, that potentially that sounds, dreadful. But do you know what? It isn't. It's fine. And landlords were worried about this in Scotland. Agents were worried about it in Scotland. Everyone said, well, how on earth are we going to be able to make this work? But, if you think about it more calmly, most tenants, when they commit to a property, they're not thinking about being there for 28 days. They're thinking about being there for quite some time. The average tenancy length is now heading out towards 4 years. So we're getting longer tenancies. People are staying longer. There's some demographics around that. Tenants are getting older, or there are more older tenants rather. So all of that, is actually beneficial. And nothing to be frightened about. Perhaps one of the biggest impacts, and we maybe talk about this more a bit later. I think you've got a slide for student lettings, but there was particular concern around the student sector, and even that is actually not being a problem in practice. And I actually, prior to today, I've actually taken the trouble to speak to all of our offices that do significant numbers of student lettings, and I knew the answer anyway, but I just thought, I'll double check and make sure nothing changed. There is in practice no difficulty with student lets, and there are no significant void periods. What's happened is the students are actually solving succession problems for the agents, and if someone goes, in most cases the students are actually supplying the successors. So the properties are full. There's no issue. If we do get a property back and we change tenants, we've got the opportunity to put the rent up at the moment quite significantly. So we can do that basically where there's a change of tenants, and that's fine. And at the moment, those rent increases are really significant. I mean, actually embarrassingly so, really. So that's one of the biggest concerns. And I just don't think in practice it just won't be a concern. So take my reassurance that if the English reforms go down the Scottish route and follow that model, this is actually not likely to be a problem at all. Loss of Section 21, which is really what happened in Scotland when the PRT came in. Again, in practice, it's not been a problem. I mean, there are a limited number of circumstances in which a landlord would want to rid himself of a tenant anyway. Actually, at the moment, there are 21 grounds under which you can do that rather than 18. And all the usual things that you would require are covered within those grounds. Slightly less than ideal at the moment is that all of those grounds, there used to be some mandatory grounds and some discretionary grounds. At the moment, all the grounds are discretionary. And there's been some pressure on the Scottish Government to go down this route, which is coming from the Green Party element of the SNP Green Coalition. And it's the Greens that are also obsessed with rent control, which we'll talk about a little more later, I'm sure. It hasn't caused any real problems in practice so far. Ultimately, the decisions are made by the first tier tribunal. There's also a requirement now that the first tier tribunal considers the reasonableness test before evicting, and that's basically to bring the private sector into line with social housing. Again, in practice so far, I'm not aware that that's caused us any problems at all. One would like to think that the first tier tribunals are reasonably sensible bodies, capable of common sense, although there are some quite strange and perverse decisions on occasion. But I say touch wood, so far we've not had, I am not aware of any significant difficulties around any of this, and I think I would be had there been any.
Brilliant. Thank you for your confidence.
Right.
Ricky, we'd love to know how this has changed your day-to-day in Wales and how this has affected with your relationship with landlords. And we do also have a live question for you, asking about the new tenancy rules in Wales. Does this mean you lose revenue from renewals?
Well, ultimately, depending on your process as an agency, but yes, that can be the case. Looking at in simple terms, probably starting at point one of the slide there, Trilly, and working on, we've got our occupation contracts with a minimum term of 6 months and then a 6-month notice period thereafter. So the biggest educational piece for us as agents and agency and landlords was getting used to a longer commitment, which was, for the vast majority, I think, a sort of a psychological hurdle rather than a practical one. As Kevin touched on earlier, average lengths of tenancy or tenants in situ is 3 years and plus. So having commitments annually from a landlord's perspective, not a tenant's perspective, was just one point to get over, and just be reassured on, to give reassurance and to understand it as a landlord. So once that initial hurdle was overcome, which I think was the biggest point from a landlord's perspective, what do I do if I need my property back? What do I do if my tenant it does something wrong or is in breach of contract? What do I do if something unforeseen happens? Much as Kevin said there, circumstances are what they are in practical terms of having a tenant property vacant as a result of a tenant's misdoing. That is a relatively simple process. In some instances, easier than it was previously. We do have mandatory and discretionary grounds, which is great for rent arrears and persistent late payments and whatnot, which is key. But ultimately, if a landlord is looking at something for a longer period of time, then having the security and the peace of mind and the commitment of annual tenancies or annual commitments from a tenant, if that's what they've agreed, is reassuring. The renewal question that came in, if contracts are renewed 6 monthly or yearly or 18 monthly, depending on that process and that timeline and that agency. So yes, there are missed opportunities possibly, but at the same time, we are seeing ourselves across our offices and the full portfolio, a big uptake and a big increase in the tenancy renewals, which went back to one of the points earlier, where landlords are confident in their sort of circumstance. They are committing to, remaining in the industry and remaining as a landlord until at least this time next year, if not longer, because their commitments are 12 monthly or greater. So the process we have here is slightly different to what Kevin mentions there, but I think the sort of general consensus is one of positives. Once it's become relatively normal, we've passed that initial 6-month tenancy transition now through the middle of this year, through the summer months. So landlords and agents are used to that first process of change, of new tenants or renewing a tenancy. So the impact from an agent and a landlord's point of view, I think would be looked at much more positively now than the apprehension at the start, or prior to it. And I think the preparation and the points that, I suppose would be, noted by Kevin and hopefully sort of ready to work for those agents in England is preparation, getting as knowledgeable, getting as much insight as can be beforehand, building a timeline of what to do, when to do it, knowing that it will be a big overhaul of all things that you do, from the very simple to the more complicated, and reassuring the clients that whilst there will be changes, fundamental changes, the majority of them are positive, and anything that's maybe a little bit more complicated or seen as a disadvantage can be discussed and looked at on a case-by-case basis between an agent and a landlord.
Thanks for your recommendations, Ricky. And Kevin, did you have anything further to add about what you would recommend to English agents and landlords to prepare for these changes, specifically around periodic tenancies and Section 21?
There's going to be a massive amount that will need to be changed. Probably most of the bits of paper that agents use and run on, we're going to need revising and changing. Landlord terms of business, tenancy agreements, obviously, any guides that are issued, information to landlords and tenants, all of that is going to need to be completely rewritten, really. And that's a massive task. The governments have a very nasty habit of actually not giving the detail. Certainly the Scottish government anyway, we'd never get the detail till very much the last minute, like literally the 11th hour of the final day, which makes it very difficult to update things like CRM platforms and get these new documents rolled out. So that's a big challenge, and I wouldn't underestimate that. Obviously, for those of us who are under a franchise umbrella, that's fine, and your franchisor brilliantly does all this stuff in the background, which means you get to carry on sleeping, but I get very little sleep for quite a long period of time. Those of you who are under the Goodlord umbrella, that's a fantastic advantage for you as well, because like us, Goodlord's lawyer will be looking at terms of business and revising all of those. So you will just be able to look forward to a whole new suite of documents that are going to be fit for purpose and right for you without you losing that sort of precious sleep. So I think that's a huge advantage. I mean, it really is a very stressful process if you're doing all of that without any assistance or an umbrella.
Yeah, I think I'd just step in there and reiterate those points. From the changes that we had here in Wales effective last December, we almost started again. There is very few, if anything, in terms of processes, protocols, administration, paperwork, terms of business, that has remained the same. Great help from you guys at Goodlord and a lot of the third parties that we work with in terms of making our occupation contract the one it is today, and having that in readiness for December last year, which, as Kevin noted, the information that's shared and the insight is not forthcoming a lot of the time. It was literally changes being made during the last days of November, bearing in mind our changes here in Wales, started on December the 1st. So, whatever time you think you've got to prepare, almost double it. Whatever resources you think you can allocate in terms of time and numbers of the team, add more to it, because it really is all consuming, and the support you get from those people you interact with, yourselves being key in my instance, is very important.
I mean, there's obviously a proposal for a new regulator for the property sector in England. To me, that means that a code of practice is almost inevitable. If there's a new regulator, what are they going to regulate unless there's a code that defines how everybody's supposed to act and behave? So I fully expect there'll be a code of practice in England, and I expect there'll be a requirement for letting agents to be registered as well. So, obviously the dust on that hasn't yet settled, but I would keep these thoughts in mind, and anything that agents could do at the moment to advance their staff or even themselves towards at least some level of qualification is going to be useful. Obviously, until we know, what level of qualification is going to be required, that's difficult. But and in Scotland, it's actually fairly demanding. But they're the potential bottlenecks. So anything that you can start doing now to advance, your business along those. Along that journey is going to be a great help, and it will save you a lot of stress later on, and it will make you a better agent.
Yeah, I think those 2 points. Third point, I think completely sort of accurate, Kevin. I think there's not many things that we can do, or maybe the agents in England can do this far in advance to prepare for it, other than look at some protocols. One being training, getting the staff as sort of as knowledgeable and as sort of as up to speed as they would like to be in, and each office and an individual would want to be, benefit from that in terms of the interaction with clients. But it's also from a cost and a financial perspective as well. You're looking to sort of spread that over a period of time, rather than there be an awful lot of time and effort and money put into to a change when it comes. So yeah, that educational piece for the staff and all of the industry, I think, is the first starting point of advice I'd give.
And get some CPD hours together, because that you sort of well having done it, but you're going to need to evidence it. So make sure you've got some certificates that you can send when the time comes, because you will be scratching around for those very late in the day unless you prepare.
Yeah, completely agree.
Brilliant suggestions. Thank you so much, both. So next up, we're going to be discussing how students have been affected by these changes, and how you think English agents and landlords can prepare for similar changes. And we do have some live questions / concerns from Paul, who is specifically quite keen to hear both of your thoughts about student tenancies being fixed term, and how that might cause quite a large problem. I'll start with you, Kevin.
Well, all I can say is if we go down a route similar to Scotland, in practice, this is likely to be fine, and you will not find, your clients will not find that they're in any way really disadvantaged by losing fixed term tenancies. However, there is in Scotland, as actually there is in England, a workaround for student lets, and the workaround is to go down the contractual route. The requirements for an AST are pretty much the same as for a PRT in Scotland at the moment, and in both countries, it shouldn't. Well, unless the property is the person's main or principal home. Strictly, it can't be an AST or a PRT. So what's the answer to that? We could use a contractual tenancy, which is great. There's nothing wrong with that. You obviously have to explain to the tenant, and you have to explain to the landlord this is why. From my point of view, I'd advise you to ask the question in writing of your prospective tenant, will this be your main or principal home? And if someone is staying at a student let in term time and then in holidays they go back to the parental home, no, it's not their principal or main residence. So that's fine, and you can perfectly properly in Scotland use a contractual tenancy in those circumstances. The problem you've got is what happens if the person's circumstances change, boy meets girl, girl meets boy, or whatever, and suddenly that student let becomes their principal place of residence, and they don't go home as often, or they don't go home at all. What happens then? You're still on the contractual tenancy unless there's a problem. And the worst that can happen in Scotland is that if you had to go to the first tier tribunal on the basis of the contractual tenancy, and the first tier tribunal looked at it and said, well, no, actually, this is clearly the tenant's principal home now, so we're going to treat this like it's PRT. Your position, or your client's position, would be that you've got a PRT, and you would then have all the PRT remedies to recover possession. So, our lawyer is not wildly keen on this, and he's basically not wildly keen on it, because he's a lawyer and they're very, very cautious by nature. But there is basically nothing wrong with doing things that way, and you could at the moment do things that way in England if you wanted to, and I suspect that post reform there will probably be a similar contractual workaround for student lets. Will you need it? Will it be prudent? Will it be worth the potential reputational risk that obliging people to that route will run? Probably not. So actually, I think what will happen is that you'll just carry on doing things as you do now, and you'll find that your student letting experience is pretty much the same as it is now, and your clients' worries will have been misplaced.
Thank you, Paul. If you're listening still, I really hope that gives you some peace of mind. Okie dokie. So, Ricky, are things a little different with students and rent controls in Wales? And if so, how?
Yes, slightly. I mean, sort of rent controls is a separate point that we'll probably move on to, or separate from the first point of students. I think ultimately, as Kevin has said there, the change and the the unforeseen impact that would have was an understandable concern by us as agents, landlords, as well as the wider picture. In real terms, we've just gone through the first transition since the changes last year in December. So we've had the first end of an academic year and a summer break and the start of new terms this month, this week and next week. There have been very little issues on the back of the changes that have been made, which is great and very reassuring for all involved. I think a lot of time and preparation has gone into making sure that's the case. New students, no different. Trilly, students that are letting for the first time from this summer onwards, it is the way it is. Students that have been used to something different last year that are maybe in their second or third year or fourth year even, and those experienced landlords have probably had to get used to the changes. Ultimately, I think Kevin touched on this earlier on in the session as opposed to for this question. Students want to move out when they need to move out. Landlords have the properties back when they need the properties back, as just that annual and academic cycle. So whilst there could be a few bumps in the road, should things go wrong in terms of tenant circumstances or student circumstances change, ultimately, touch wood, we've not had a single problem this year, and the way that contracts are structured or the way that we've structured the fixed term periods have worked really well, been bought into by tenants, students, as well as the landlords of those student properties. So will we see anything changing as we end this next academic year? Possibly, in terms of a few lessons learned and things that we would tweak as an agency or tweak as a protocol. But ultimately that preparation and the education, communication to landlords and new students or experienced students has made it a pretty smooth process.
I mean, it's going to be a difficult one to talk to clients about, because you will not have any evidence to support the reassurance that you're trying to give, because the evidence doesn't exist in England at the moment. So, if you lose fixed terms and there's no more Section 21, I mean, you could be struggling for actual hard evidence to say to a client that, well, look, here's the data. This is what your experience is like. So you're going to have to inform yourselves more fully and look at the broader picture and look at other jurisdictions where these changes have already happened. And I would suggest that Scotland is a really good place to look, because it's been this way here since 2017, and the student letting sector in Scotland is booming. I mean, it's really buoyant. The yields are the best, or pretty much the best that anybody can get. Capital growth's good, and occupancy is virtually full. If anybody is really struggling and needs some reassurance, then I'd suggest a call to a letting agent in Scotland, really. But as I say, in my experience, this will be absolutely fine, and any landlord clients who are worried about the impact of these changes are going to have on their performance of their portfolios, I think you just got to be quite firm in managing those clients and just say, look, on all the basis of everything I've found out, I think this is fine and you don't need to worry.
Yeah, I completely agree. I think it's just being positive there. As you say, Kevin, we looked at some of the track record with you guys in Scotland and sort of tried to sort of use that as reassurance. We have definitely seen a sort of a strong student market over the last 18 months, in terms of the numbers and the uptake and the proactivity ahead of commitment to a specific property, and void periods, like you say, are at an all-time low or non-existent. We've also seen advantages where tenants, students are staying on, for a second or third academic year at the same property. So that process is made easier as well, from a wealth perspective, which is another advantage to relay.
Yeah, exactly the same. So I say it's potentially a harder one to really explain, but I think you just got to be very confident in handling any objections, and certainly you should be saying to somebody, well, look, there's no need to panic. And if you sell, your student investment portfolio, what else are you going to do with the cash that's going to give you these sort of returns, Mr. Landlord? It's very hard to replace a 10% yield and better than 10% capital growth. Really. There's an exemption in Scotland for student schemes over 30. Purpose-built student schemes tend to not be covered by the PRT. I would guess there'll be something similar in England, whether it's 30 or maybe a slightly lower number of units in England, because values are slightly higher. I don't know, but there is likely to be some sort of get out for purpose-built student accommodation.
I think one quick point on there as well is just the current market conditions, in terms of supply and demand, the amount of properties, whatever property it is, be that student property, a different type of residential property. It is very difficult to find the suited property for yourself, whether you're a student or not. So they are the prospective students and those students looking for accommodation are very organised. They're far more structured than they were before in their preparation of understanding the new occupation contract, understanding how things are different from last year if they were a student last year. So that's playing into the hands of it going smoothly, because time is not necessarily on their side to sort of look at why things are different. Just look at the benefits of it being different. So we're seeing that as a big difference in this year's take up, because it wasn't applicable last year with the changes in December.
Fabulous. And Ricky, was there something else you wanted to mention about rent controls, or did you already cover that? Apologies, I've been reading some of the questions coming in.
Yeah, no, again, it's probably not something to dwell on, really. I think, we were talking earlier on in the week and saying that, that the impact or the negative impact that has whenever it's looked at or introduced. So, there's been some debate here in Wales. There's been sort of some questions and tables for us all to contribute to and put our opinions of. And general consensus is, it is even managed in an appropriate way would be detrimental. It would affect supply and demand. It would disencourage new tenants and new landlords to the market. It would probably encourage landlords to exit that are thinking of that already, and ultimately would increase the rent, which is probably one of the bigger concerns at the moment. So not maybe something that is a big one to move on to or with.
Thank you.
I'd say similar. I mean, we actually have rent control in Scotland at the moment. It's completely counterproductive in my view. As you said at the start, we've got a basic rent cap at 3% and up to 6% where a client can evidence increase in what's called prescribed costs, which is basically paying more for their mortgage. People are using that. 3%, is it great? Not really. It's not sort of thrilling. In a lot of circumstances, mortgages have gone up, mortgage repayments have gone up more than that, although mortgage costs go up for a while and then they tend to come down again. So it all goes through the system and sorts itself out. And I think most landlords are sort of here anyway, are in the game longer term, and we'll see through a short period of relatively high or higher mortgage rates. The reality around mortgage rates is they're actually still at relatively low levels historically. So it's certainly at the moment it's okay if you've got to pay more for your mortgage. Nobody's throwing a party or is desperately pleased about that, but they are seeing the longer term. I have no experience of rent controls having worked anywhere in the world, and I'm quite certain they're not working in Scotland because I see the data for the increases that are being achieved when we change tenants, and the increases on a change of tenant at the moment are astronomical. So that's very much supply and demand talking, and if the government were really serious about helping tenants, what they would be doing is rolling back some of the tax changes that have been off-putting to landlords, and certainly there would be no rent controls, which is also off-putting to landlords, and they would be doing all they could to encourage increased supply and bringing new landlords into the sector. And the private sector's got a big role to play, and it's like a tap that government can switch on very quickly, and there's no impact on the public purse because it's not government money. It's all funded by private investors basically, and people like choice. Tenants like to have a wide choice. They like to live in the same properties or same type of properties that everyone else does. They like to have a wide choice of property. So if you really want to help tenants, then encourage supply and do not enact measures that basically are off-putting and are likely to have a negative impact on supply.
Yeah, I think this is...
Rent control doesn't work. Thank God there doesn't seem to be any serious talk of rent control coming in England. It would definitely be unhelpful, and it would definitely restrict supply, which puts rents up.
Some statistics out today that, from a Welsh point of view, I think the consensus is the same there, Kevin, that it wouldn't be productive in any form. The Welsh rent increases over a 2 or 3 year period through 2020 up until the summer of this year. Wales has got the biggest increase. We're over 30% in terms of, the cost of rent annually, in that period of time. And a big contribution to that, supply and demand aside, is the increase in asking prices, in between tenant A and tenant B. As Kevin says, so a 3, 4, 5, 6, 7%, whatever it may be, as an increase for a tenant in situ who's choosing and wanting to be at a property rather than being there reluctantly, I think is a very positive for the market, rather than a 15, 20, 25% increase when tenant A leaves to tenant B that has no choice. So, that stats this morning of 30% is eye-watering almost, and that can't continue.
There we go, everyone. Oh, sorry to cut you off, Kevin. I think we're pushing for time a little bit. I think we've had some really great recommendations from Ricky and Kevin today about how best to prepare for these changes. But main ones here, of course, are ready your team to make sure everyone's workload will allow for the changes. Prepare. Share the information at the right time with your landlord so they don't get overwhelmed. And lastly, to build a strong database of contractors and tradespeople. I'm sorry if we didn't answer all of the questions that came in. We tried to get through them in live time. So if you have some, please have a look at our resources on our website, and we have lots of places where you can reach us. But thank you so much, Ricky, and thank you, Kevin, for your time and knowledge today. It's been an absolute pleasure to have you.
Thank you. Thanks for inviting me, and hopefully we've helped to those that have attended.
Yeah, for sure.
Good luck.
Thanks, everyone. Have a wonderful day.
Bye.
Bye.